Forward Operating Base, Sentinel, Texas, / Mexico border, present day. 3:47 in the morning, and the world ended in fire. The south wall of Forward Operating Base Sentinel didn't collapse. It vaporized. 200 pounds of military-grade explosive packed into a stolen construction vehicle, driven by a man who believed paradise waited on the other side of the detonation. The blast wave traveled faster than sound, faster than thought, turning concrete and steel into a horizontal rain of shrapnel that carved through everything in its path. 12 wounded Marines lay on stretchers in the field hospital. Most had been sleeping. Most would never wake up if the armed men now pouring through the breach reached them first. The trauma bay door kicked open, not from the blast, from boots. 3 men in tactical gear, faces covered, weapons raised. They swept the room with their muzzles the way predators sweep tall grass, looking for movement, looking for targets, looking for anyone who might fight back. They found a woman in surgical scrubs, 5'3", maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had come loose during the chaos. Blood on her hands from the chest wound she'd been treating when the world exploded. No weapon visible, no threat apparent. The lead gunman dismissed her in half a heartbeat. Biggest mistake of his life. Also his last. The woman's hand moved, not fast, precise. She picked up the M4A1 carbine that had been leaning against the supply cabinet, the rifle that belonged to the Marine who died on her table 6 minutes ago. Her movements were economical, efficient. The movements of someone who'd done this exact thing so many times that muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Safety off, buttstock to shoulder, cheek weld, sight picture, trigger press. The sound in the enclosed space was catastrophic. The lead gunman's head snapped back. He was dead before his brain registered the sound of the shot that killed him. His 2 companions had just enough time to understand what was happening before the woman fired again. And again. Controlled pairs, center mass, no hesitation, no mercy. 3 targets, 6 rounds, 4.2 seconds. 3 bodies on the floor. The woman lowered the rifle. She checked the magazine. 22 rounds remaining. She scanned the room for additional threats, found none, then calmly walked back to the Marine on the stretcher, whose chest wound still needed packing. Her hands didn't shake. They never had. Master Gunnery Sergeant Knox Thorne was 300 meters away when he heard the gunfire from the hospital. He was pinned down behind a burned-out Humvee, trading shots with hostiles who'd breached the perimeter, coordinating a defense that was rapidly becoming a retreat. His radio crackled with frantic reports. South wall gone, east fence compromised, enemy count unknown but substantial, casualties mounting. And now gunfire from the hospital where the wounded were supposed to be safe. Thorne keyed his radio. All stations, this is Sentinel Actual. Hospital is under attack. I need bodies on that building now. No response from the hospital, just static and the distant sound of automatic weapons fire. Thorne's jaw clenched. He'd put 12 Marines in that hospital, 12 men who'd bled for their country and trusted him to keep them safe while they healed. And the only thing standing between them and a massacre was 1 trauma surgeon, 2 nurses, and a medic who looked like he should still be in high school. Plus the contract nurse. The one Thorne had tried to get removed from the base 2 weeks ago. The one he'd called a liability to her face. The one whose name he could barely remember because he'd never bothered to learn it properly. Thorne didn't know it yet, but 4 years ago, in a desert 7,000 miles away, that woman had fired 17 shots that saved his life and the lives of every Marine in his reconnaissance team. She'd done it from a position so well concealed that Thorne never saw her, never knew her name, never had the chance to say thank you to the angel with the rifle, who'd appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. She had a call sign back then, a name that other snipers whispered with the kind of respect usually reserved for legends. They called her Ghost. And Ghost didn't need Thorne's permission to do what she'd been trained to do. She just needed targets. 4 years earlier, Syrian desert operation Crimson Veil. The sun rose over the desert like a punishment from God. 112 degrees by 0600, 123 by noon. The kind of heat that made your eyeballs feel like they were cooking in their sockets. Sergeant Lyra Brennan had been in position for 63 hours. No food, half a canteen of water. No communication with her unit because the radio had taken shrapnel from the same mortar round that separated her from her team. No extraction plan because nobody knew where she was. Just Lyra, her rifle, and a ghillie suit that made her invisible against the desert floor. And 3 miles away, a MARSOC reconnaissance team was about to die. Lyra watched through her scope. 12 Marines, good men, pinned down in a dried riverbed with 80-plus ISIS fighters closing in from 3 sides. The Marines had cover but no concealment. They had ammunition but no air support. They had courage, but courage doesn't stop bullets. They had maybe 15 minutes before they were overrun. Lyra's scope swept the enemy positions. She calculated angles, distances, wind speed, elevation. No computer, no spotter, just her brain and 10,000 hours of training and her father's voice in her head, clear as the day he died. Math doesn't lie, Lyra. Numbers are truth. Range to nearest target, 1,923 meters, 1.19 miles, over a mile. Most people couldn't throw a baseball that far. Lyra was about to put a bullet through a man's chest at that distance. The math was brutal. Bullet drop at 1,923 meters, 681 inches, 56.7 feet, the height of a 6-story building. Lyra had to aim at the sky and trust that gravity and velocity and ballistic coefficient would bring that bullet back down to earth exactly where she needed it. Wind was worse. 14 miles per hour crosswind from the left, gusting to 18. At this range, wind could push the bullet 16 inches off target, enough to turn a kill shot into a miss, enough to tell every ISIS fighter exactly where she was hiding. But there was more, always more. Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation. Northern hemisphere, shooting east, the bullet would drift 2.1 minutes of angle to the right. Spin drift from the barrel's rifling, another 1.4 minutes right. Temperature, 112 degrees, thin air, bullet would fly faster, less drop, negative 0.5 minutes of angle correction needed. Lyra's brain processed all of it in 7 seconds. Elevation, 56.7 feet up. Windage, 3.2 inches right to compensate for the leftward wind minus the rightward drift from Coriolis and spin. Her heart rate was 62 beats per minute, slow, controlled. The heart rate of someone who'd done this before, who'd done this so many times that the fear had been burned away, and all that remained was the math and the mission. She took a breath, let half of it out, held the rest. Her finger found the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure, smooth, steady. The rifle spoke. 3.2 seconds later, 7,000 miles of supersonic flight later, the bullet arrived at its destination. The lead ISIS fighter's chest exploded. He dropped like someone had cut his strings. The Marines in the riverbed didn't know what happened. They just knew that the man who'd been about to throw a grenade into their position was suddenly dead, and nobody could figure out who'd shot him. Lyra was already acquiring her second target. Breathe, calculate, adjust, fire. 17 shots. 17 ISIS fighters who would never go home. 17 men who died without ever knowing where the bullets came from. The MARSOC team extracted under covering fire from a sniper they never saw. Master Gunnery Sergeant Knox Thorne, team leader, keyed his radio. Unknown friendly, identify yourself. Lyra's voice came back, barely a whisper. Call sign Ghost, Marine Scout Sniper. You're clear to extract. Move now. Thorne tried to respond, tried to ask for coordinates, for a name, for anything, but Ghost had already gone silent. vanished back into the desert like she'd never been there. Thorne never forgot that voice. Deep, calm, utterly without fear. The voice of someone who just killed 17 men and felt nothing but the satisfaction of a job well done. 4 years later, Thorne still thought about ghosts sometimes. Wondered who she was. Wondered if she'd made it home. Wondered if he'd ever get the chance to shake her hand and say the words he'd carried for 4 years. Thank you for my life. He had no idea that in 7 months he'd meet her again. He had no idea she'd be wearing surgical scrubs instead of a uniform. And he had no idea that he'd spend those 7 months treating her like she was worthless. Present day, forward operating base Sentinel, 7 months earlier. The C-130 cargo plane touched down on the airstrip at 0600 on a Tuesday morning in March. The rear ramp lowered and Lyra Brennan stepped out into heat that felt like a physical slap. 108 degrees. Texas in summer. Not as bad as Syria, but close enough to trigger memories she'd rather not revisit. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, boots, a simple black t-shirt. Her hair was longer than it used to be, past her shoulders now instead of the regulation bun she'd worn for 8 years. She carried one duffel bag. Everything she owned fit inside it. A man in ACUs met her at the bottom of the ramp. Late 50s, graying hair, the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years in too many war zones. Name tape said, Walsh. Rank insignia, Commander. Miss Brennan? Walsh extended his hand. Dr. Everett Walsh, base surgeon. Welcome to FOB Sentinel. Lyra shook his hand. Firm grip, calloused palm. This was a man who did his own work instead of delegating it. Thank you for having me, Doctor. Walsh led her toward a cluster of buildings that looked like they'd been assembled from shipping containers and optimism. I'll be honest with you, we're undermanned and overworked. 2 surgeons counting me, 1 anesthesiologist, 3 nurses, 1 medic who's never seen real blood outside of a training dummy. That's why I'm here. Walsh glanced at her. Something in his eyes that might have been curiosity. Your resume is impressive. Trauma certification, emergency medicine, 3 years at level 1 facilities in Phoenix and San Diego. That's high-speed work. What makes a civilian nurse want to come to a forward operating base on the Mexico border? Lyra had prepared an answer for this question, a sanitized version of the truth that wouldn't raise red flags or prompt follow-up questions. I go where I'm needed, Doctor. Right now, you need me. Walsh accepted that, barely, but he was too tired and too desperate for qualified help to push harder. The trauma bay was exactly what Lyra expected. Functional, Spartan, clean but worn, medical equipment that was top of the line 5 years ago and adequate now, enough to save lives if you knew what you were doing, enough to kill people if you didn't. A young man in ACUs stood at attention when they entered. 21, maybe 22, freckles across his nose, red hair cropped close, green eyes that were trying very hard to project confidence and succeeding only in broadcasting nervousness. Miss Brennan, this is Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Finn Gallagher. Finn, this is our new trauma nurse. Finn extended his hand. Ma'am, pleased to meet you. Lyra shook it. His palm was sweating. Don't call me ma'am, call me Lyra. Yes, yes, Lyra. Walsh checked his watch. I have rounds. Finn, show her around. Get her settled. Briefing at 1400. He left without waiting for a response. Finn practically vibrated with nervous energy. Ma'am, Lyra, I want you to know I've studied every protocol cover to cover. I scored 96 on my field med exam. I know my stuff. Lyra set her duffel down. She pulled a roll of gauze from the supply shelf and placed it on the table between them. Finn, look at me. He looked. A man comes through that door. Femoral artery is open. Blood is hitting the floor in pulses. Your hands start shaking. What do you do? Apply direct pressure. Pack the wound with... No, before that, before your hands even move, what do you do? Finn stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Lyra's voice was gentle but implacable. You breathe, Finn. One breath, just one, because right now your brain is panicking. A panicking brain sends panicking signals to your hands. Panicking hands can't pack wounds. Unpacked wounds kill patients. One breath resets everything. That one breath is the difference between a phone call that says your husband is coming home and a knock on the door from two Marines in dress blues. Finn's face changed. The eagerness drained out. Something serious took its place. Something that understood that this wasn't theory anymore. Who taught you that? His voice was barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes went somewhere else for half a second. Somewhere far away. Somewhere covered in sand and blood. Someone who's not here anymore. She pushed the gauze toward him. Pack this wound. Show me. He did. His hands shook. His pressure was inconsistent. His speed was too slow. Lyra corrected him. Hand position, pressure points, speed. She made him do it again. And again. And again. 7 times. By the 7th time, his hands were steady. Good. Tomorrow we do it in the dark. In the dark? Bombs don't wait for the lights to come on, Finn. Over the next week, Lyra transformed Finn Gallagher from a nervous kid into something that resembled a combat medic. She ran him through drills that made him sweat through his uniform. She simulated every nightmare scenario she could imagine. Chest wounds, arterial spray, multiple casualties, equipment failure, working in darkness, working under fire. On day 4, she simulated a chest wound with realistic blood flow. Finn's hands seized up. His fingers curled. His breathing went ragged. His eyes got that look, the look Lyra had seen on 100 faces in 100 bad moments. The look that said, I can't do this. Finn! Her voice cut through his panic like a blade through silk. Look at me. Not the blood, not the wound. Me. He looked at her. One breath. He breathed. Now pack the wound. His hands moved, shaky at first, then steady, then fast. Clean pressure, correct placement, perfect execution. Again. She made him do it 7 times. By the 7th time, his hands didn't shake at all. You just saved a man's life 7 times, Lyra told him. Remember this feeling. When the real thing happens, and it will happen, your hands will remember what your brain forgets. Finn looked at her with something new in his eyes. Not the nervous eagerness of a kid trying to impress. Something deeper. Trust. Lyra, who are you really? I'm the person who's going to make sure you're ready. On day 3, Lyra met Master Gunnery Sergeant Knox Thorne. She was in the trauma bay, restocking shelves, when she heard boots. Not 1 pair, 3. Heavy, deliberate. The walk of men who own every room they enter. Thorne filled the doorway, 6'2", 220 pounds, shoulders that looked like they'd been carved from granite. 41 years old, but moved like he was 25. 2 Marines flanked him, Staff Sergeant Wyatt Bishop on the left, Corporal on the right. Thorne didn't look at Lyra like she was a person. He looked at her like she was a problem. So, you're the contract nurse. That's right. Let me be real clear with you. My men get hurt, they come to this room. The person standing in this room better be worth a damn, because I already know what happens when they're not. Lyra stopped what she was doing. She turned. She faced him fully. And when she spoke, her voice was level, calm, without a trace of defensiveness. Then you know why I take this seriously. Do I? Because in my experience, contractors take the paycheck seriously. The job, not so much. He stepped closer. Close enough that most people would step back. Lyra didn't move. You ever been shot at? Lyra looked him dead in the eyes. Have you ever sutured a chest cavity while someone's screaming? Bishop almost smiled. Almost. Thorne's jaw tightened. I asked you a direct question. And I asked you one back. We can keep trading questions, Master Gunny, Or I can tell you what matters. I'm here to do one thing. Keep your men alive if they come through that door broken. That's my job. That's my only job. And I'm going to do it whether you trust me or not. Trust is earned. Then watch me earn it. Thorne held her stare for 3 full seconds. In those 3 seconds, something flickered behind his eyes. Something he couldn't quite name. This woman was not afraid of him. She was not intimidated by him. And the weight behind her words was not the weight of someone who'd read about combat. It was the weight of someone who'd bled in it. He turned and walked out. Bishop lingered in the doorway. He studied Lyra with eyes that missed nothing. He's not personal about it. He just carries Daniels with him everywhere. Lyra knew that name. The contractor who'd been here before her. The one who'd frozen when the shooting started. The one whose failure had cost a Marine his life. He should carry it, Lyra said quietly. That's what loss is supposed to do. Make you carry it so you never drop someone else. Bishop tilted his head slightly. You sound like you know something about that. Everybody knows something about that. He left, but something stayed with him. A feeling he couldn't shake. A sense that this woman was not what her badge said she was. On day 12, Lyra made a decision that would save every life on this base. She'd been reading the daily threat briefs every morning. Most medical staff walk past the operations board without a second glance. Lyra didn't. She stood in front of that board for 20 minutes every morning, reading patterns, tracking movement, cross-referencing locations. Lieutenant Commander Bryn Whitaker, the intelligence officer, noticed on day 5. Whitaker was 36, sharp, competent, the kind of officer who'd earned her rank through ability instead of connections. She leaned against the doorframe and watched Lyra study the threat map. Most nurses don't read threat maps. Lyra didn't turn around. Most nurses haven't buried friends. You read them like you understand them. Not just the words, the patterns. Patterns keep people alive. Where did you learn to read patterns like that? Life. Whitaker wasn't buying it. She was an intelligence officer. Reading people was her job. And this woman, this quiet contract nurse with steady hands and flat affect and eyes that never stopped scanning, did not compute. But Whitaker also knew when to push and when to wait. She waited. On day 12, Lyra saw it. 3 local informants who'd been providing regular updates to the intelligence team had gone silent. All 3 within 6 days of each other. Surveillance reports showed small groups of military-age males at observation distance from the south perimeter. Drone activity had increased along a specific corridor. Patrol routes had been probed 3 times in the past week. Short contacts, quick withdrawals, testing response times. Lyra's stomach dropped. She knew this playbook. She'd seen it in Syria in 2019. When your sources go dark and the watchers multiply, it means one thing. They're not watching anymore. They're planning. She went straight to Dr. Walsh. We need to prepare for mass casualties. Walsh put down his pen. Excuse me? The threat indicators have shifted. Informants are dark. Surveillance has increased on the south side. Patrol probes are escalating. Someone is building toward an attack. Lyra, the official assessment is low threat. I know what the assessment says. I also know the assessment is wrong. That's a strong statement from a contract nurse. Lyra put both hands on his desk and leaned forward. Her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Doctor, I have stood in a room where the official assessment said low threat. 4 hours later, I was holding my best friend's hand while she bled to death because nobody prepared. I am asking you, not as a contractor, but as a human being who has watched people die from unpreparedness. Let me stage this trauma bay for mass casualty. Walsh looked at her for a long time. He didn't understand threat patterns. He didn't understand intelligence indicators. But he understood the look in her eyes. That was not the look of someone guessing. That was the look of someone who'd been right before and been ignored before and had paid for it with someone she loved. What do you need? extra blood products, double our chest seal inventory, surgical airway kits at every station, and I need 48 hours to drill the medical team until they can do this in their sleep. That's significant resource expenditure for a low-threat environment. It's a significant waste of life if I'm right, and we're not ready. He signed the authorization. Word reached Thorne within the hour. He came to the medical bay like a storm with boots. Who authorized this? Dr. Walsh. Based on what? The threat level is low. Based on my assessment that the threat level is wrong. Thorne laughed. Short, hard, no joy in it. Your assessment? A civilian nurse is making threat assessments now? Someone has to. That someone is my intelligence team, not a contractor with a stethoscope. Lyra stopped what she was doing. She faced him, and she said something that hit harder than she intended, harder than anything she'd said since arriving. Master Gunny, I have put people in the ground. I have held hands that went cold while someone told me everything was low threat and under control. And I promised myself I would never stand in a room and let that happen again because someone with authority told me not to worry. So you can question my credentials. You can question my background. You can question my place on this base. But do not question my judgment about when people are about to die. Because that is the one thing I have never been wrong about. The room went silent. Bishop, standing behind Thorne, felt the hair on his arms rise. Even Thorne, who'd faced down insurgents and enemy fighters in death itself, felt something in that moment he couldn't name. This woman was not afraid of him. She was not intimidated by him. And the weight behind her words was not the weight of someone who'd read about combat. It was the weight of someone who'd bled in it. Thorne said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, if you're wrong, you've wasted resources and time. If I'm right, I've saved your men. He walked out. But he didn't order her to stop. And that was the first crack in the wall. That night, alone in her quarters, Lyra opened the small box she kept at the bottom of her bag. The bronze star sat on a bed of velvet. The Combat V device caught the dim light. Below it was a folded letter. Elena's handwriting, messy, rushed, alive. Lyra, if something happens to me, don't you dare stop. Not with a gun, with your heart. You're the strongest person I know, and the world doesn't need you behind a wall. It needs you out there where it counts. Promise me. Lyra folded the letter, put it back, reached under her mattress and pulled out the Beretta M9. Checked the magazine, 15 rounds. Checked the chamber, clear. Slid it back under the mattress. Then she dropped to the floor and did 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 10 minutes of shadow boxing. Her strikes were crisp, precise, military. The body remembers what the badge doesn't show. She sat on the edge of her bed and listened to the desert silence. And the silence was wrong. Too deep, too still. The same silence she'd felt in Syria before the worst night of her life. 3 days. She could feel it. Something was coming for this base. And when it arrived, it wouldn't care about threat assessments or clearance levels or who wore a uniform and who wore scrubs. It would only care about one thing: who was ready. Lyra Brennan checked her weapon one more time, set her alarm for 0400, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She hadn't slept through a full night in 2 years, but she rested the way a Marine rests. Light, alert, one sound away from standing. 72 hours later, at exactly 3:47 in the morning, the south wall of Forward Operating Base Sentinel disappeared in a column of fire and shrapnel. And the screaming started. And the gunfire started. And the only person on that entire base who was already on her feet, already moving, already calm, was the contract nurse that nobody trusted, and nobody noticed, and nobody knew. And the promise she'd made to a dead woman was about to be kept in blood. The blast hit at 3:47, and Lyra was already standing. She'd been awake for 11 minutes, sitting on the edge of her cot, boots laced, Beretta under her waistband, staring at the wall. Her body had woken her the way it always did before something terrible. No alarm, no sound, just a feeling deep in her gut that pulled her out of sleep like a hand yanking her from water. Then the south wall blew apart. The concussion wave knocked supplies off shelves and threw the trauma bay door open. Dust filled the air. The lights flickered twice and died. Emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, flooding the room in red. Lyra was already moving. She grabbed Finn Gallagher by the shoulder before the kid even understood what had happened. He was on the floor, tangled in his blanket, eyes wide, mouth open. The kind of frozen that gets people killed. "Finn, get up right now." "What happened? What was—" "We're under attack. Get to the trauma bay. Do exactly what we drilled. Nothing more, nothing less." "Lyra, I can't. I don't—" She grabbed his face with both hands, her palms pressed against his cheeks. She forced his eyes to lock with hers. "You can. You will. Because there are men bleeding right now who need your hands to be steady. Breathe." He breathed. Again. He breathed again. "Move." He moved. Lyra reached the trauma bay 14 seconds after the explosion. She flipped on the backup surgical lights she'd pre-positioned 2 days ago. She ripped open the first triage kit. She laid out chest seals, tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, and surgical airway tools in the exact order she drilled 100 times in Syria and a dozen times on this base. Gunfire erupted outside. Not random shots, coordinated automatic fire from multiple positions. South perimeter, east flank, overlapping fields of fire, textbook complex ambush. Lyra recognized the pattern in her bones before her brain even processed it. Then the first Marine came through the door, Staff Sergeant Wyatt Bishop. He was dragging his left leg. His thigh was torn open and blood was pumping out in rhythmic spurts. Arterial. He had a tourniquet half applied above the wound, but his hands were slick with blood, and he couldn't cinch it tight enough. "Bishop, sit down." "I can still fight, just patch me up and—" "Sit down now." She grabbed the tourniquet, positioned it 2 inches higher, and cranked it until Bishop screamed. The bleeding slowed to a seep. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, and wrapped it tight. 45 seconds. 1 patient stabilized. Bishop grabbed her arm. His grip was weak but desperate. "They breached the south fence. At least 15, maybe 20. They're heading for the hospital." Lyra didn't react the way a civilian should have reacted to that news. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She simply nodded and said, "How long before QRF responds?" Bishop stared at her. Quick reaction force. That was military terminology, tactical terminology, not something a contract nurse should know, let alone use instinctively. 20 minutes, maybe more. Comms are jammed on primary frequency. Secondary, Thorne's working it. Lyra pointed at Finn, who was standing at his station, pale but upright, hands shaking but positioned correctly. "Finn, take over Bishop. Keep pressure on that wound. If the bleeding restarts, crank the tourniquet 1 more turn. Talk to him. Keep him conscious." "Okay." "Don't say okay, say copy." "Copy." The second Marine came through the door at 3:51. Corporal Reeves. Young, maybe 23. His face was gray, and his chest was making a sound Lyra hadn't heard in 2 years. A sucking chest wound. Open pneumothorax. Air entering the chest cavity through the hole, collapsing the lung. The Marine carrying him was someone Lyra recognized. Gunnery Sergeant Deacon Hartley, 42 years old, 23 years in the Corps. Hands that had never trembled in combat were shaking now. Hartley dropped Reeves on the table. "He's not breathing right. Something's wrong with his chest. Fix him. Fix him now." Lyra ripped open Reeves's body armor and saw the wound. Entry wound right side between the 4th and 5th rib. Every time Reeves tried to inhale, air whistled through the hole instead of going through his airway. She slapped a chest seal over the wound. Vented. The seal created a one-way valve, letting trapped air escape, but preventing new air from entering. Reeves's breathing stabilized within 10 seconds, but his oxygen saturation was dropping. His lips were turning blue. The lung was already partially collapsed. The seal alone wouldn't be enough. Lyra grabbed a 14-gauge needle and looked at Finn across the room. "Finn, what do I do for tension pneumothorax?" She was testing him, even now, even in this. Finn's voice cracked, but the answer came. "Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line." "Good, watch me." She drove the needle into Reeves's chest. A rush of air hissed out. His oxygen climbed. His color started coming back. Hartley watched the whole thing with his mouth open. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" "Nursing school," Lyra said without looking up. That was a lie. She'd learned it in a blown-out building in Ramadi, on her knees covered in someone else's blood, with a Marine sergeant screaming instructions in her ear while mortar rounds shook the walls. At 3:54, a bullet punched through the metal wall of the trauma bay and buried itself in the supply cabinet 6 inches from Lyra's head. Finn hit the floor. Lyra didn't move. She finished securing Reeves's IV line, taped it, checked the drip rate, and only then looked at the hole in the wall. "Finn, get back on your feet. They're shooting at us. They've been shooting at us since this started. You're still alive. Your patient is still alive. Stay on your feet and keep working." Another round came through the wall, then another. The attackers were targeting the hospital deliberately. Lyra understood what that meant. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated. Take out the medical facility and every wounded man on this base dies. At 3:56, Thorne's voice crackled over the emergency radio that Lyra had mounted on the wall. His voice was controlled but tight, the voice of a man fighting hard and losing ground. "All stations, this is Sentinel Actual. Multiple breaches south and east perimeter. Enemy count estimated 20 plus. QRF is 30 minutes out. I need every able body on the line. Hospital, lockdown and shelter in place." Lyra looked at the door. She looked at Bishop, who was gritting his teeth on the table. She looked at Hartley, who was checking his rifle magazine. "Hartley, how many are pushing toward us?" Hartley stared at her. "Lady, why are you asking me tactical questions?" "Because if they reach this door, everyone in this room dies. Where's your nearest fighting position?" "There's a sandbag barrier 20 meters east, but there's nobody manning it. Everyone pulled back to the main compound." Lyra made a decision in that moment that crossed every line a civilian contractor was supposed to respect. She reached under the surgical table and pulled out the Beretta M9. Bishop saw it first. "What the hell? You have a weapon?" "I have a lot of things you don't know about." At 3:59, Gunnery Sergeant Deacon Hartley burst back through the trauma bay door. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye and carrying 2 M4A1 rifles. He looked at Lyra, looked at the Beretta in her hand, and something passed between them that didn't need words. "You know how to use that?" Hartley asked. "Better than most people in this building." Hartley was Marine Security Force. He had an instinct for his own kind. Something in the way Lyra held that weapon, something in her stance, the way her fingers sat along the frame instead of on the trigger, the way her eyes tracked the door and the walls simultaneously. "Who are you?" he asked. "Right now, I'm the only thing standing between those men on those tables and the people trying to kill them." Hartley held out the M4 rifle. "Take it. The M4 has more range." Lyra took the rifle. She checked the magazine. 28 rounds. She charged the weapon. The sound of the bolt slamming forward filled the room. And every person in that trauma bay heard it. And every person understood that something fundamental had just changed. Finn looked up from Bishop's side. His face was white. "Lyra, what are you doing?" "My job, Finn. Keep pressure on that wound." She turned to Hartley. "How many between us and the east barrier?" "I counted 4 moving through the motor pool. Flanking, possible. They're using the vehicles for cover. Lyra looked back at Finn one more time. If anyone comes through that door who isn't wearing an American flag, you take Bishop's sidearm and you defend your patients. Understood? Finn's hands were shaking, but he looked at Bishop, who gave him a nod, and something hardened in that kid's face. Something Lyra recognized because she'd felt it herself a long time ago. The moment you stop being scared and start being responsible. Copy, Finn said. Lyra stepped out of the trauma bay into a corridor filled with smoke and noise and chaos. And she moved the way she hadn't moved in 2 years. Low, fast, weapon up, scanning corners, checking sectors. Hartley was behind her. He watched her move and he knew. He didn't need a personnel file. He didn't need a DD-214. The way this woman moved through a combat zone told him everything her badge didn't. Marine, he said. Once. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Not now, Gunny. They reached the east corridor at 403. 2 attackers were moving between vehicles, advancing toward the hospital. Lyra dropped to one knee, steadied the M4 against a concrete barrier. Control her breathing. One breath. The same breath she'd taught Finn. Combat breathing. 4 count in through the nose. 4 count hold. 4 count out through the mouth. 4 count hold. Her heart rate dropped from 95 to 67 beats per minute. Range to target, 68 meters. Close enough that wind wouldn't matter. Far enough that she needed to account for bullet drop. Not much. Maybe 2 inches at this distance. Iron sights only. No optic. No red dot. Just the front sight post in the rear aperture and 10,000 hours of muscle memory. She aligned the sights. Front post centered in the rear aperture. Top of the post level with the top of the aperture. Target's center mass resting on top of the post like a ball balanced on a pedestal. Exhale halfway. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Don't jerk. Squeeze like you're squeezing water from a sponge. The rifle barked. 68 meters away, the first attacker's chest exploded. He dropped. Lyra's hand cycled the bolt. Muscle memory, not conscious thought. Her hand knew what to do before her brain sent the signal. Second target acquired. Same process, 1.1 seconds from first shot to second shot. The rifle spoke again. Second target down. 2 more appeared from behind the motor pool. Lyra shifted. Acquired. Fired. 1 dropped. The 4th dove behind a truck. Hartley engaged the second target from a flanking position. Down. 2 more appeared from the darkness. Lyra and Hartley engaged simultaneously. Both targets dropped within a second of each other. Hartley looked at her. Nursing school doesn't teach that. No, it doesn't. At 4:06, they pushed forward to the sandbag barrier, and Lyra took a position covering the east approach. From here, she could see the south perimeter, where the main assault was concentrated. Thorne's team was engaged in a vicious firefight. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like strobes. She could hear Thorne on the radio calling positions, directing fire, doing what a master gunnery sergeant does when his base is being overrun. Then a voice she didn't expect came over the radio. A panicked voice. Dr. Walsh. Medical emergency. We have 2 more wounded coming in. Trauma bay is overwhelmed. Gallagher is alone. I need Brennan back here now. Lyra looked at the east approach. 2 more attackers were advancing. She looked back toward the hospital. Finn. She covered 20 meters in under 5 seconds and came through the door to find Finn on his knees between 2 tables. One hand on Bishop's wound and the other trying to stop a new patient from pulling out his own IV. Lyra, he's crashing. His pressure is dropping and I can't. Which one? Reeves. The chest seal is leaking. Lyra was at Reeves's side in 2 strides. She ripped off the failing seal, applied a new one, and reassessed. The lung was collapsing again. The needle decompression wasn't holding. She needed to do a chest tube. Right now. In a field hospital. Under fire. She grabbed a scalpel, made a lateral incision between the ribs, pushed a tube into the pleural space, connected it to a drainage system she'd improvised from IV tubing in a sealed container. Air and blood rushed out. Reeves's chest expanded. His oxygen climbed. Finn watched her do it in under 90 seconds. "That's not a standard nursing procedure," he whispered. "No, it's not." At 4:11, two more wounded came through the door. One was a Marine security guard with shrapnel wounds across his back. The other was a Marine named Hawkins with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Gut shot. He was conscious and in agony. Lyra triaged in 3 seconds. Hawkins first. The gut wound was potentially fatal without surgery, but she could stabilize him. The Marine with shrapnel wounds was painful, but not immediately life-threatening. She worked on Hawkins for access, fluid resuscitation, pressure dressing on the wound, pain management. She kept talking to him the entire time. "Hawkins, stay with me. Talk to me. Tell me something. It hurts." "I know. What's your wife's name?" "Lisa." "You're going to call Lisa tomorrow. Hear me? Tomorrow. Promise?" "I don't make promises. I make guarantees. Now hold still." She packed the wound. Hawkins screamed. She held him down with one hand and packed with the other. Finn came alongside and assisted without being asked. His hands were steady. His face was focused. The drills had taken hold. At 4:14, the gunfire outside intensified. Lyra heard Hartley's M4 firing in rapid succession. Then silence. Then more firing. The east approach was getting hit hard. She made another decision that broke every rule. She turned to Finn and put both hands on his shoulders. "I need to go back out there. Hartley is alone. If that position falls, they come straight through this door." "Lyra, you can't keep going back and forth. You're one person." "Finn, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "You are ready. Everything I taught you, every drill, every breath, this is what it was all for. You handle the patients. I handle the door. Trust yourself." "I trust you." "Then trust what I taught you, because that's the same thing." She took the M4 and went back out. At 4:17, she reached Hartley's position and found him reloading behind the sandbags, with a wound on his left arm that he was ignoring. "You're hit." "Flesh wound. Let me see it." "Later, we've got 4 more coming from the south." Lyra took position, shouldered the M4, and waited. Her breathing was steady. Her heart rate was controlled. She was Staff Sergeant Brennan again. Not the ghost of her, the real thing. Every cell in her body remembered. The attackers came around the corner of the motor pool in a 2-by-2 formation. Trained, disciplined, not amateurs. Lyra fired. Hartley fired. 2 dropped. 2 scattered. One of them threw a grenade. Lyra saw the arc, grabbed Hartley by the collar, pulled him behind the barrier. The blast showered them with dirt and shrapnel. A piece of metal sliced Lyra's forearm. She felt it. She ignored it. She rose. Acquired the 3rd attacker. Fired 3 rounds. He went down. The 4th ran. Hartley was breathing hard beside her. Blood was running down his arm. Now Lyra's was running too. They looked at each other. "What's your name?" Hartley asked. "Your real name?" "Staff Sergeant Lyra Brennan, United States Marine Corps, Scout Sniper, 0317. Hartley almost laughed. "I knew it. I knew the second you picked up that weapon." "Keep it to yourself for now." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." At 4:22, Lyra keyed the tactical radio and said the words that would change everything. "This is Ghost, Staff Sergeant Lyra Brennan, USMC, Scout Sniper. East perimeter is secured. 4 enemy KIA. Hospital is holding. I need suppressive fire on the south approach and medevac in 15 minutes. Dead silence on the radio. Then Thorne's voice, quiet, disbelieving. "Say again your call sign and rank." "Ghost, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Scout Sniper. And Master Gunny, your east flank is clear because I cleared it. Now get me that medevac." 2 seconds of silence that felt like a year. Then Thorne said, "Copy, Ghost." And in those 2 words, everything that Master Gunnery Sergeant Knox Thorne had believed about the contract nurse, everything he had assumed, everything he had dismissed, collapsed like a building with no foundation. Lyra didn't wait for the moment to land. She was already running back to the trauma bay because Reeves's chest tube needed checking, and Hawkins's blood pressure was dropping, and Finn was alone, and the fight wasn't over. She burst through the door. Finn was exactly where she left him, hands steady, eyes focused, doing everything she taught him. Status. Bishop is stable. Reeves's oxygen is holding at 92. Hawkins is dropping. I started a second line. Good. You're doing good, Finn. She went to Hawkins. His skin was cold and gray. She checked his abdomen. Rigid. Internal bleeding. He needed surgery. Real surgery. Not field triage. How long until medevac? Bishop answered from his table, gritting through pain. Thorne said 15. Hawkins doesn't have 15. She turned to Dr. Walsh, who had been working on the shrapnel patient in the corner. Doctor, I need you on Hawkins. Exploratory laparotomy, right now. Walsh looked at her, looked at the room. Bullets were still hitting the walls. In here? We don't have a choice. Walsh hesitated for 1 second. Then he washed his hands in the basin, pulled on gloves, and picked up a scalpel. Lyra assisted. She held retractors, suctioned blood, clamped bleeders while Walsh worked inside Hawkins's abdomen. 11 minutes later, Walsh found the source, a lacerated mesenteric vessel. He clamped it, sutured it, packed the cavity. Hawkins's blood pressure stabilized. Lyra looked at the clock. 4:38. She walked back to the east door, checked the perimeter, saw headlights in the distance. Helicopters. The sound of rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air. Medevac was 2 minutes out. She walked back inside, put down the M4, washed the blood off her hands, picked up a fresh pair of medical gloves. Finn watched her do it. The transition from warrior to nurse in the time it took to snap on latex. He shook his head. Who are you? He asked. The same question he'd asked weeks ago, but this time it meant something completely different. Lyra pulled the gloves tight and checked Reeves's chest tube. I'm the person who made sure you were ready, Finn, and you were. At 4:41, the medevac helicopters touched down. The gunfire had stopped. The remaining attackers had been killed or had fled. FOB Sentinel was holding. The hospital was intact. Every patient inside it was alive. Every single one. Lyra stood in the doorway of the trauma bay. Her arm was bleeding. Her scrubs were soaked in other people's blood. The M4 was leaning against the wall behind her. The medical gloves were still on her hands. Hartley walked past her, holding his wounded arm, and nodded. Semper Fi, Staff Sergeant, she nodded back. Thorne's voice came over the radio one final time that night. All stations, Sentinel actual, base is secure. All enemy neutralized. Begin casualty collection and damage assessment. Then a pause, a long pause, and then, Ghost, report to the command post at 0600. Lyra pulled off her gloves. She checked each patient one more time, adjusted Reeves's oxygen, tightened Bishop's bandage, squeezed Hawkins's hand and told him Lisa was going to get that phone call. Then she sat down on the floor of the trauma bay, leaned her head against the wall, closed her eyes, not to sleep, to listen. The base was quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes after violence. Heavy, ringing, full of things that haven't been said yet. And in 4 hours, Lyra Brennan would walk into the command post, and a room full of Marines would learn that the woman they had ignored for 7 months had just saved their brothers, secured their flank, and fought with the kind of precision that only comes from one place, the United States Marine Corps. And the man who had tried to have her removed from the base would have to stand in front of her and reckon with the fact that the intelligence that had saved his life 4 years ago in Syria, the overwatch that had enabled his team's extraction, had come from the same hands that tonight held his wounded men together. Lyra Brennan sat on that floor with blood drying on her arms and a letter from a dead friend folded in her pocket. And she didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel proud. She felt Elena close, present, like a hand on her shoulder that wasn't there. And she whispered so quietly that no one in that room could hear, "Nobody died tonight, Elena. I kept my promise." Lyra didn't move from that floor for 47 minutes. She sat with her back against the wall, blood drying on her forearms, the cut on her left arm throbbing in time with her heartbeat. She could hear the medevac helicopters lifting off, the heavy chop of rotors fading into the pre-dawn sky, carrying Hawkins and 2 other critical patients to a level 1 trauma center 60 miles east. She could hear boots moving outside, the careful, controlled movement of men clearing the perimeter, checking bodies, securing the base. She could hear Finn breathing. He was sitting 3 feet from her on the floor, his back against the opposite wall. His hands were resting on his knees. They were still, completely still. And that was the thing that hit Lyra harder than anything that had happened in the last hour. Those hands had been shaking 12 hours ago during a drill. Now, after the real thing, after blood and gunfire and chaos, they were steady. "You did good tonight, Finn." He didn't answer right away. He was staring at the floor between his boots where a pool of someone's blood had dried into a dark stain. "I didn't freeze." "No, you didn't." "I wanted to." When that first bullet came through the wall, every muscle in my body wanted to drop and curl up and disappear. But you told me to breathe. You told yourself to breathe. I just reminded you once. Everything after that was you. Finn looked at her then, really looked at her. "Lyra, the things you did tonight, the way you moved out there, the way you talked on the radio, Staff Sergeant, USMC, Scout Sniper, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you?" Lyra opened her eyes. She looked at this kid who had just become a man in the space of 40 minutes, who had kept 3 wounded Marines alive with hands that shouldn't have been steady, but were. And she made a decision. "Not now, Finn. Later. I promise. But not now." He accepted it. Not because the answer didn't matter, but because he trusted her enough to wait. At 5:30, Dr. Walsh came into the trauma bay. He had washed the blood off his hands, but not off his uniform. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 2 hours. He walked to Lyra, looked down at her, extended his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet. "The cut on your arm needs sutures. I'll do it myself." "I'm fine." "Lyra." "Fine." He sat her on a stool and cleaned the wound. It was a 4-inch laceration from the grenade shrapnel. He irrigated it, applied local anesthetic, and began suturing with the steady precision of a man who had done 10,000 stitches. While he worked, he talked quietly so only she could hear. "I pulled your full personnel file 30 minutes ago. I called Meridian Defense Medical and told them I needed your complete background for the after-action report. They sent it encrypted." Lyra said nothing. 178 combat patrols, Bronze Star with Valor, Scout Sniper, targeting packages for Joint Special Operations. You built the intel package for Operation Crimson Veil. He paused, pulling a stitch tight. That operation saved a MARSOC element in Syria. The element leader received a citation. You got a line in a classified report that nobody outside of a skiff would ever read. Walsh tied off a stitch and looked at her. "The element leader was Knox Thorne." "I know." "You knew this entire time?" "Yes." "And you never said a word? Not when he disrespected you, not when he called you a liability, not when he tried to have you removed from the medical rotation." "He tried to have me removed?" Week 2. I denied it. Lyra absorbed that. Thorne had tried to get rid of her. The man whose life she had saved from a hide site in Syria had tried to kick her off the base, and she felt nothing about it. No anger, no bitterness. Because she hadn't come here for Knox Thorne's approval. She had come here for Elena. Walsh finished the last stitch and covered the wound with a clean dressing. Lyra, I have to include your full background in the after-action report. The commanding officer will read it. Thorne will read it. Everyone will know. I understand. Is there anything you want to say before that happens? Lyra looked at him. Yes, make sure the report says Finn Gallagher performed under fire with distinction. That kid saved lives tonight. Walsh almost smiled. I'll make sure. At 5:52, Lyra walked to the showers. She stood under cold water for 6 minutes, watched blood, some hers, most not, swirl down the drain. She pressed her forehead against the wall and let the water hit the back of her neck. And she allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of feeling everything she had suppressed for the last 2 hours. The fear, the anger, the grief that never fully leaves. The sound of Elena's voice in her memory saying, "Don't you dare stop." 60 seconds. Then she turned off the water, dried herself, put on clean scrubs, and became the contract nurse again. At 600 sharp, she walked into the command post. The room was full. Thorne was there. Bishop, his thigh bandaged, was sitting in a chair against the wall, refusing to be evacuated. Hartley stood by the map board. Lieutenant Commander Bryn Whitaker was at the intelligence desk. Dr. Walsh stood near the door, and 12 other personnel, Marines and support staff, filled every remaining space. Every single one of them looked at Lyra when she walked in. The room went dead quiet. Colonel David Mercer, the base commander who had arrived by helicopter 20 minutes earlier, stood at the head of the table. He was 56, gray hair, hard eyes, the weathered face of a man who had spent 30 years making decisions that saved lives and took them. He was holding a file. Lyra recognized it by thickness. That was her file, her real file. Miss Brennan, take a seat. I'll stand, sir. Mercer studied her for a moment. Then he opened the file and began reading. Not to himself, to the room. Staff Sergeant Lyra Brennan, United States Marine Corps, 8 years of service, 2 deployments, Ramadi, Iraq, 2017, Syria, 2019 through 2023, 178 combat patrols, MOS 0317, Scout Sniper with secondary qualification in combat field medicine. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Bronze Star with Combat V for Valor. Awarded for actions on November 14, 2018, during which Staff Sergeant Brennan carried a wounded Marine 430 meters through hostile fire while engaging enemy combatants with her sidearm. Mercer looked up from the file. He looked at Thorne. Thorne wasn't moving. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes were doing something Lyra had never seen in 7 months on this base. They were uncertain. Staff Sergeant Brennan was the primary sniper for Operation Crimson Veil, a joint special operations mission in Syria, March 2022. Her overwatch and precision fire enabled the extraction of a MARSOC reconnaissance team under contact with 80-plus ISIS fighters. Staff Sergeant Brennan, separated from her unit and operating alone for 4 days, eliminated 17 enemy combatants at ranges exceeding 1,900 meters. Mercer closed the file. The element leader was Master Gunnery Sergeant Knox Thorne. The silence in that room became something physical, something that pressed against the walls and the ceiling, and every person standing in it. Bishop turned his head and stared at Thorne. Hartley's mouth opened slightly. Whitaker closed her eyes and shook her head, the way a person does when a puzzle they've been working on suddenly reveals its picture. Thorne said nothing. Mercer continued. After separating from the Marine Corps 2 years ago following a Purple Heart injury, Miss Brennan obtained her nursing degree and contracted with Meridian Defense Medical for forward deployment assignments. She arrived at FOB Sentinel 7 months ago as a civilian trauma nurse. He set the file on the table. Last night, during the attack on this installation, Miss Brennan stabilized 4 critical patients, performed an emergency surgical procedure under fire, armed herself, engaged and neutralized enemy combatants on the east perimeter, and coordinated tactical communications that directly contributed to the defense of this base. He looked at Lyra. "Are there questions?" Bishop spoke first. "So the person who saved my life last night also saved the Master Gunny's life 4 years ago. And none of us knew." "Correct. And she's been here for 7 months getting treated like she doesn't belong. And she never said a word." "That appears to be the case." Bishop looked at Lyra. "Why?" Lyra met Bishop's eyes across the room. His question hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you shut us all up on day one? Why did you let us treat you like you were nothing?" "Because I didn't come here to prove anything to anyone," Lyra said. Her voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of that silent room. "I came here to do a job." "But you could have thrown that bronze star on the table and told Thorne to his face that you saved his team. You could have—" "And then what?" Lyra interrupted. "You trust me because of a medal? You trust me because of a piece of paper? That's the same mistake Thorne made when he trusted the last contractor. Good resume, good credentials. And when it mattered, the man hid and someone died." She paused. "Let that sink in. I don't want trust based on paperwork. I want trust based on what I do when the lights go out and the blood hits the floor." Hartley, standing by the wall with his arm bandaged, said quietly, "Semper Fidelis." Lyra glanced at him. He nodded. She nodded back. Mercer turned to Thorne. "Master Gunny, do you have anything to say?" Every eye in the room moved to Thorne. This was the man who had thrown her name across a room on her first day, who had called contractors cowards, who had tried to have her removed, who had judged her every single day for 7 months based on a badge and a set of scrubs. Thorne stood up. He was a big man, broad shoulders, thick neck, hands that had killed people and saved people and carried coffins. He walked across the room toward Lyra, and every person in that command post held their breath. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't salute. He stood there and looked at her, and what happened in his eyes in those seconds was the thing that nobody in that room would ever forget. The wall came down, not slowly, not in pieces, all at once, like a demolition charge going off behind his face. "I tried to get you removed from this base. I know. I called you a liability to your face. You did. And you built the package that saved my life and 4 of my men in Syria. And you've been walking around this base for 7 months knowing that. And you never once threw it in my face. It wasn't mine to throw. Why not? Because it wasn't about you, Master Gunny. It was never about you." Thorne's voice dropped, barely above a whisper, but in that silent room, every word carried. "Who was it about?" Lyra reached into her pocket. She pulled out the folded photograph. 2 young women in marine utilities, arms over shoulders, grinning. She held it up so Thorne could see. Her name was Elena Voss, Corporal, USMC. She survived 2 deployments. She had a daughter named Sophia, who's 10 years old now. She died on a medevac helicopter because the field medic froze and couldn't pack a wound. Lyra's voice stayed level, but something beneath it cracked, just slightly, like ice over deep water. "I became a nurse because of her. I came here because of her. And nobody died last night because of her." Thorne looked at the photograph for a long time. He recognized something in that image. Not the faces, the bond. The same bond he had with every Marine in his unit. The bond that makes you carry someone else's weight when your own legs are breaking. "I misjudged you," he said. "You didn't misjudge me. You judged the badge, the scrubs, the clipboard. You saw what you expected to see because the last time you trusted a contractor, it cost you someone you loved. I understand that. I don't blame you for it. You should. I lost someone too, Master Gunny. I know what it does to you. It makes you build walls so high you can't see who's standing on the other side. But walls don't keep people safe. People keep people safe." Thorne's chin dipped. just barely, the closest thing to a bow that a man like him would ever offer. Staff Sergeant Brennan. It was the first time he'd used her rank, the first time he'd acknowledged what she was. And the way he said it, with weight and gravity, and something that sounded a lot like respect forged in the hardest possible way, meant more than any medal or citation ever could. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. He extended his hand. She took it, and in that handshake, in the grip of two warriors who had saved each other's lives without ever knowing it, something broke open that was bigger than both of them. Bigger than rank, and branch, and badge, and every stupid wall that human beings build between themselves and the people who are trying to help them. Bishop started clapping, then Hartley, then the whole room. Lyra didn't smile. She didn't cry. She squeezed Thorne's hand once, released it, and turned to Mercer. "Colonel, I have one request." "Name it." Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Finn Gallagher performed under fire last night with exceptional skill and composure. He stabilized 3 critical patients, maintained triage protocols during active combat, and made clinical decisions that directly preserve life. He should be recognized. Mercer nodded. "It'll be in the report. And Colonel, he did it because he was trained, not because he was lucky. He was trained. That matters." "Noted, Staff Sergeant." Lyra turned and walked toward the door. She had patients to check. Bishop needed a wound evaluation. Reeves's chest tube output needed monitoring. And she wanted to find Finn and tell him what had just happened in this room before he heard it from someone else. She was almost at the door when Whitaker caught her arm. "I knew something was off about you. The way you read those threat briefs, the way you predicted this attack. You should trust those instincts, Commander. They're good. You could have told me. Would it have changed anything?" Whitaker thought about it. "No, I suppose not. You would have done everything exactly the same." Then it didn't need to be said. Lyra walked out of the command post into the morning light. The base was damaged, vehicles burned, the south wall was rubble, but the hospital stood, and every person who had been inside it when the shooting started was still breathing. She found Finn in the trauma bay. He was restocking supplies. His hands were moving with a calm efficiency that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. When he saw her, he stopped. "I heard. Bishop told me everything. The Bronze Star, the patrols, Operation Crimson Veil, Thorne's team, 17 kills at 1,900 meters. He shook his head. "You were a Marine this whole time." "I'm still a Marine, Finn." "Why didn't you tell me?" Lyra sat down on the stool where Walsh had sutured her arm. She looked at this kid, this 21-year-old from Ohio, who had joined the Navy because his grandfather had carried a legacy. And she gave him the only answer that was true. "Because if I told you I was a combat veteran with a Bronze Star, you would have listened to me because of what I was. Instead, you listened to me because of what I taught you. And what I taught you saved 3 men's lives last night. Not my rank, not my medals, what you learned. That's the difference between respect and trust, Finn. Respect is easy. Trust is earned in the dark." Finn's eyes were wet. He blinked hard and looked away. "My grandfather used to say something, and then that man was the only one standing. Your grandfather was a smart man. He would have loved you." Lyra felt something loosen in her chest, something tight and old and heavy that she had been carrying since the day she left the Corps. "Tell me about him sometime." "I will." She stood up and put her hand on his shoulder. "You're not green anymore, Finn. After last night, you're not green." He straightened. Something in his posture shifted. Not the nervous kid who stood at attention on day 1. A corpsman. A medic who had been tested and hadn't broken. "Copy, Staff Sergeant." She almost smiled. Almost. 3 days later, the intelligence came through. Whitaker found Lyra in the supply tent doing inventory. She walked in, closed the flap behind her, and stood there with her arms crossed. "I need to talk to you about the intelligence indicators." "Okay." "You identified the attack pattern 72 hours before it happened. You read threat briefs that most medical staff ignore. You extracted actionable analysis that my own team missed. I need to understand how. I told you, I read patterns. Lyra, Staff Sergeant, whatever you want me to call you. I'm the intelligence officer on this base, and I had a low threat assessment posted when you were staging for mass casualties. You were right, and I was wrong, and I need to know what I missed so it doesn't happen again. Lyra put down the clipboard. She respected Whitaker. The woman was sharp, professional, and honest enough to stand in front of someone and admit she had made a mistake. That took more courage than most people understood. You didn't miss anything in the data. The data was there. What you missed was the context. Explain. 3 informants going dark in the same week. That's not a coincidence. That's either intimidation or elimination. Either way, it means someone on the other side is cleaning house before an operation. You flagged it as a communication disruption. I flagged it as a precursor because I spent 2 years in Syria watching exactly that pattern precede every major attack. Whitaker absorbed this. And the patrol probes, short contacts with quick withdrawal. They weren't engaging, they were timing. How fast do we respond? From which direction? With how many? They were mapping our reaction. My team assessed those as harassment. Your team hasn't been in a place where harassment turns into a funeral. I have. Whitaker was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Lyra. I want you in my briefings. I'm a contractor. You're a marine intelligence specialist with more combat pattern analysis experience than half my team combined. I don't care what your badge says. I care about not getting people killed. You'd have to clear it with Thorne. I already did. Lyra blinked. That was the second crack. Thorne had approved her access to classified intelligence briefings. The man who had tried to have her removed from the base 3 weeks ago was now opening doors he had personally locked. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 0600. I'll be there. Whitaker turned to leave, then stopped. Lyra, for what it's worth, if I had listened to you 3 days earlier, we might have had air support on standby. We might have had the QRF pre-staged. People still would have been hurt, but maybe not as badly. You listened when it mattered. That's what counts. That's generous. No, that's practical. Guilt doesn't protect anyone. Learning does. At 1600 that same day, something happened that Lyra did not expect and was not prepared for. She was checking on Reeves in the recovery area. His chest tube was draining properly. His oxygen was stable. He was conscious for the first time since the attack. When she walked in, his eyes tracked to her and stayed there. You're the one, he said. His voice was thin, raspy from the intubation. I'm the one what? Hartley told me. You did the chest tube under fire, kept me alive when my lung was collapsing. Dr. Walsh did the hard work on Hawkins. Reeves's hand came up off the bed and grabbed her wrist. Weak, but deliberate. Don't minimize it. I was dying. I know what dying feels like because I felt it. And then someone cut into my chest, and I could breathe again. That was you. Lyra didn't pull her hand away. She let him hold her wrist. And she looked at this man, this Marine who had been through things that most human beings couldn't imagine. And she saw in his eyes something that she hadn't allowed herself to look for in a very long time. Gratitude so deep it had no words. You're going to be fine, Reeves. Full recovery. The tube comes out in 3 days, and you'll be back annoying your team in a month. Staff Sergeant Brennan. Yes. Thank you. 2 words. The simplest 2 words in the English language. But the way he said them, with everything he had left, with the weight of a man who understood exactly how close he had come to never saying anything again, those 2 words hit Lyra harder than the grenade shrapnel. You're welcome, she said, and she meant it in a way she had never meant anything. At 1800, Mercer held a formation. He stood in front of the assembled personnel with the damaged south wall visible behind him and read commendations. He cited the Marines' defense of the perimeter. He cited the security force. He cited Dr. Walsh's surgical actions. Then he said, I am also recognizing the actions of Miss Lyra Brennan, civilian contractor, Meridian Defense Medical. Mercer looked at Lyra, who was standing at the edge of the formation in her scrubs. Miss Brennan's actions during the attack demonstrated extraordinary valor, medical expertise, and tactical proficiency that directly contributed to the survival of wounded personnel and the defense of this installation. He paused. However, it has come to my attention that Miss Brennan's civilian contractor status does not accurately reflect her capabilities or her background. Effective immediately, I am requesting a temporary reactivation of Staff Sergeant Brennan's military status through a reserve recall provision, pending approval from Marine Corps Personnel Command. Lyra's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected this, hadn't asked for this. Staff Sergeant Brennan, if approved, would serve in a dual capacity as medical and intelligence support for the duration of this deployment. The formation broke into murmurs. Bishop caught Lyra's eye and gave her a nod. Hartley straightened. Finn, standing with the medical staff, looked like he might burst. Lyra stood perfectly still. Reactivation. Return to active status. Wearing the uniform again. The eagle, globe, and anchor that she had set aside 2 years ago, when she decided that saving lives mattered more than taking them. After the formation, she found Mercer. Colonel, I didn't ask for reactivation. I know. I came here as a civilian for a reason, and that reason got 4 of my people through the worst night of their lives. But I've got a base that's been hit, a threat environment that just escalated to critical, and a woman standing in front of me who is hands down the most capable person on this installation. I need you operational, Staff Sergeant, not as a contractor, as a Marine. I left the Corps because I couldn't save my best friend. And you came back because you can save everyone else. That's not running from the uniform, Lyra. That's honoring it. She didn't answer right away. She stood there in the fading light and felt the weight of that decision pressing on her from both sides. The nurse who had promised herself she would heal, not fight, and the Marine who had fought her whole life and couldn't stop. Can I have 24 hours? You can have 12. The threat isn't waiting. She nodded and walked away. At 2000, she sat in her quarters with the photograph in her hand. Elena and Lyra. Syria. 2 women who thought they were invincible. She called Elena's mother. She hadn't called in 8 months. She owed her that and more. Carmen Voss picked up on the second ring. Lyra, is that you? It's me, Carmen. How's Sophia? She's 10 now. She looks just like her mother. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Lyra closed her eyes. Carmen, I need to tell you something. Are you okay? I'm on a forward operating base. There was an attack. I'm fine, but they've asked me to put the uniform back on. Silence on the other end. Then Carmen's voice, heavy and careful. And what did you say? I haven't said anything yet. I'm asking you. Why are you asking me? Because I left the Corps for Elena. I became a nurse for Elena. Everything I've done for 2 years has been for Elena. And now they're asking me to be a Marine again. And I need to know if that betrays the promise I made. Carmen Voss was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice cracked but held. Lyra, my daughter didn't die because you were a Marine. She died because someone wasn't ready. You spent 2 years making yourself ready. You spent 2 years making other people ready. That's not a betrayal. That's the promise being kept in a way Elena would have understood better than anyone. She paused. Carmen, listen to me. My daughter loved you. You were her sister. And if she were standing in front of you right now, she would grab you by the shoulders and say, Lyra Brennan, you put on that uniform and you go save every life you can. And you stop carrying me like I'm a weight. I'm not a weight. I'm a wing. Lyra's throat closed. She pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed through it. Are you there? Carmen asked. I'm here. Then go be a Marine, mija, and come home safe. I will. She hung up. She sat in the dark for 15 minutes. Then she stood, opened her locker, and pulled out the one item she had brought that nobody ever saw. Folded at the bottom of her bag, beneath everything else, was a set of Marine combat utilities, desert pattern, faded, worn soft from 100 washes and 100 patrols and 100 nights sleeping in the dirt. She had carried them to every assignment since she left the Corps. Never wore them, never took them out, but never left them behind either, because leaving them behind would have meant letting go of something she wasn't ready to release. Lyra held the uniform against her chest and felt the fabric under her fingers. And for the first time in 2 years, it didn't feel like a ghost. It felt like skin. At 0700 the next morning, Lyra walked into the command post wearing Marine combat utilities with her rank insignia on the collar. Staff Sergeant, USMC. The room noticed. Every person in that room noticed. Thorne was standing at the map table. He turned, saw her, and for 1 second his face showed something unguarded. Not surprise, recognition, like he was finally seeing the person who had been there all along. Staff Sergeant Brennan reporting as requested. Mercer nodded. Welcome back, Marine. Whitaker handed her a classified threat brief. Full classification, no more unclassified summaries. Lyra opened it and began reading. Within 4 minutes, she identified 3 data points that changed the operational picture entirely. Commander Whitaker, these surveillance patterns along the southern corridor aren't random. They're sequential. Someone is building a second targeting package. The attack 3 nights ago wasn't the main event. It was a proof of concept. The room went cold. Explain, Mercer said. The attack tested our response time, our QRF capabilities, our medical capacity. They now know how fast we react, from which directions, how many we can treat. If I were planning a follow-up, I would hit us harder from a different axis and specifically target our ability to evacuate casualties. You're saying we're going to be hit again. I'm saying someone is planning to hit us again, and this time they'll know our playbook. Thorne stepped forward. What do you recommend? It was the first time he had ever asked her for tactical input, not medical advice, not a nursing opinion, a tactical recommendation from one warrior to another. Change everything. Response routes, QRF staging, communication frequencies, medical evacuation protocols. If they mapped our reactions, we give them a new map that doesn't match. How fast can you build a new pattern analysis? Give me access to the full intelligence feed, 12 hours. Thorne looked at Mercer. Mercer nodded. You've got it, Thorne said. Then he added something that made Bishop almost fall out of his chair. And Brennan, I want you in our tactical planning sessions going forward, not as medical support, as an intelligence advisor. Lyra nodded. Copy, Master Gunny. 16 months later, Lyra Brennan stood in front of 20 Marines at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, California. The sign above the door read, Brennan Protocol Program, Dual Role Combat Medic Sniper Course. The Marines sat in 3 rows, young, eager, nervous. The same nervous she'd seen in Finn's eyes on day 1. Lyra stood at the front of the classroom in Marine Combat Utilities. Staff Sergeant insignia on her collar, a teaching credential on the wall behind her, and next to that, a plaque, in memory of Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Brennan and Corporal Elena Voss. Excellence doesn't announce itself. It just exists. Before your hands move, Lyra said, what do you do? The Marines answered in unison. 1 breath, Staff Sergeant. Why? A Marine in the front row answered. Panic brain sends panic signals to panic hands, Staff Sergeant. And panic hands? Kill patients, Staff Sergeant. Good. She walked along the front row. Finn Gallagher, now Sergeant, stood at the back of the room. Co-instructor, 23 years old. Steady hands, steady eyes. Thorne stood in the doorway, arms folded, small smile. He'd flown out from Texas just to watch the first class graduate. Lyra stopped in the center of the room. My father taught me to shoot when I was 11 years old. The Marine Corps taught me discipline. My best friend's death taught me purpose. And every one of you will carry this forward. Because knowledge not passed is knowledge lost. And we don't lose Marines because someone wasn't ready. Not on my watch. Not ever. The class responded. Semper Fi, Staff Sergeant. Dismissed. The Marines filed out. All except one. A young woman, maybe 19. She approached Lyra hesitantly.
Staff Sergeant?
Yes. My name is Private Sophia Voss. Lyra's heart stopped. The girl had Elena's eyes, Elena's chin, Elena's smile. My grandmother told me to find you. She said you knew my mother. Lyra's vision blurred. She blinked it clear. I did. Your mother was the best Marine I ever knew. She wanted me to be a Marine too. Grandma showed me her letters. What's your MOS? 0317, Scout Sniper Track. Of course it was.
Your mother would be proud, Private.
Will you teach me the way you taught the others? Lyra looked at this girl, Elena's daughter. 10 years old when her mother died, now standing here in Marine Utilities asking to be taught by the woman who couldn't save her mother but had spent 2 years making sure no one else died the same way. I'll teach you everything I know, Sophia smiled. Elena's smile. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. After the class, Lyra drove to Arlington National Cemetery. She walked the roads until she found the headstone she visited every year. Corporal Elena Voss, United States Marine Corps, beloved daughter, beloved mother, Semper Fidelis. Lyra knelt in the grass. She placed a small bronze pin beside the flowers someone else had left. It was the Combat V device from her commendation medal, the symbol of valor under fire. I kept my promise, Elena. Nobody died on my watch, not one. She touched the cold stone. Your daughter is growing up beautiful. She's a Marine now. Scout Sniper Track. She has your eyes, your chin, your heart. She told me last week she wants to save lives the way you did, the way I do. We're teaching her both. Lyra pressed her forehead against the headstone. I'm back in, full active duty, teaching at Pendleton, building the program we always talked about, the one that combines what you were with what I became. Healer and warrior, both. Not one or the other, both. She stood up, adjusted her uniform, touched the headstone one last time. Semper Fi, Elena. Always faithful, always. Then Staff Sergeant Lyra Brennan walked away from the grave of the woman who changed everything. And she walked toward the rest of her life with steady hands and clear eyes and a heart that had been broken and rebuilt and broken again and rebuilt again until it was stronger than anything that had ever tried to destroy it. Because fire doesn't care what you wear. It doesn't care about rank or gender or branch or badge. It asks only one question. When everything collapses, are your hands steady? Lyra Brennan's hands were steady on the day she carried a wounded Marine through Ramadi. They were steady on the night she saved a hospital full of Marines at FOB Sentinel. They were steady on the morning she pinned on a uniform she thought she'd never wear again. And they were steady now, walking forward into whatever came next, carrying the memory of everyone she had lost and the promise that no one else would die because someone wasn't ready. Not on her watch. Not ever. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one nobody sees until everyone needs them. Lyra Brennan was proof of that. She always had been. And the world was just beginning to understand what one woman with steady hands and an unbreakable heart could do when she decided that invisible was just another word for ready.